Despite the public declarations of innocence and the confident reassurances by Kenneth Copeland's legal team, the pressure mounted rapidly. Federal prosecutors painted a damning picture in the courtroom, one that accused Copeland of using his ministry as a personal bank account, channeling millions of dollars in tax-free donations into an opulent lifestyle that few televangelists had ever dared to live so openly. The evidence began to pour in with shocking clarity. Financial records spanning nearly 2 decades were brought to light, meticulously documented by federal investigators who had spent years untangling the complex web of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and real estate transactions that disguised the flow of money. Witness after witness stepped forward. Some were ex-employees, broken and burdened with guilt, who described years of complicity and silence. Others were financial analysts hired by the prosecution who explained how church donations were used to buy not just private jets, but entire hangars, exotic cars, luxury yachts, and resort properties in the Bahamas, Switzerland, and Aspen. A trail of wealth so staggering that it eclipsed even the wildest rumors that had surrounded Copeland for years. Some of the properties, it turned out, had never once hosted a spiritual retreat or missionary event, as publicly claimed. They were exclusive vacation homes registered in the ministry's name but used solely by Copeland and his inner circle. In court, Kenneth Copeland sat mostly still, his hands often clasped in prayer or gripping the table before him. The once confident televangelist who had roared with conviction on stage for decades now appeared hollowed out by the weight of legal scrutiny. On several occasions, cameras captured him weeping silently, his shoulders trembling as former confidants testified against him, and yet, to the end, he refused to publicly admit wrongdoing. In a rare courtroom address, Copeland looked toward the gallery and declared, "I have walked with the Lord all my life. If I am being judged for blessings, then let it be known that my blessings came from God." His words, though emotionally charged, failed to sway the growing tide of evidence against him. The defense team argued fiercely that the financial practices in question were not uncommon among megachurch leaders. They claimed that Copeland's personal earnings were legitimate and clearly separated from ministry finances, that any alleged discrepancies were the result of clerical errors or misinterpretations, not deliberate deceit. But the jury appeared unmoved. By the end of the 6-week trial, the facts were too overwhelming. The prosecution had presented irrefutable documentation, over $150 million unaccounted for, millions routed through offshore entities registered. In Belize and Panama, forged invoices, falsified ministry budgets, and a small circle of enablers who had received substantial consulting fees to keep the truth buried. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, the courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Kenneth Copeland lowered his head, and Gloria, seated behind him, broke into sobs. Their adult children, visibly shaken, had no words as the sentence was announced just days later. Life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Citing the scale of financial fraud, betrayal of public trust, and years of deliberate obfuscation as justification for the unprecedented punishment, the judge called it an egregious misuse of spiritual authority for personal enrichment and labeled the case one of the most significant breaches of faith-based fiduciary duty in American history. The televangelist world was rocked. Leaders from other ministries scrambled to issue public statements, some distancing themselves entirely from Copeland, others expressing sorrow but urging the faithful to remember the man's earlier work. Among them were big names like Joel Osteen and Paula White, both of whom had once shared stages with Copeland. "This is not the end of faith," Osteen said carefully during a televised Sunday service, "but it is a reminder that even the highest among us are not above accountability." Meanwhile, critics of the prosperity gospel used the scandal as ammunition, claiming it proved what they had long suspected, that the theology of wealth equaling divine favor was not only flawed, but dangerous. At Kenneth Copeland Ministries headquarters in Newark, Texas, the fallout was immediate, offices closed, broadcasts were canceled, and the once glittering auditorium where Copeland had preached to thousands fell silent. Devoted followers who had once mailed in millions of dollars in donations each year now demanded transparency, refunds, and explanations. Gloria Copeland, devastated but still loyal to her husband, tried to hold the remnants of the ministry together, issuing a recorded message to followers in which she asked for prayers and expressed belief that God would vindicate them in His time. But as donors dried up and staff members resigned en masse, it became clear that the Copeland empire was collapsing under its own weight. Even within his inner circle, fractures began to form. One of his longest-serving lieutenants, a senior, pastor named Marcus Dean, gave a televised interview where he admitted that for years he had helped shuffle money between accounts. "I was scared," he said, "scared to speak up, scared to lose everything. But now I see how deep the deception ran, and I pray for the people we hurt." The confession sent shockwaves through the evangelical community, further eroding the last remaining trust in the Copeland legacy. Meanwhile, the viral footage of Copeland's reaction to the sentencing became a symbol of the entire saga. In the video, which was recorded on a cell phone by someone inside the courtroom, Copeland clutches a Bible, his face crumpling as the sentence is read aloud. "This isn't justice," he mutters repeatedly, his voice breaking, tears streaming down his face. "This isn't justice." The clip quickly spread across social media platforms, trending under hashtags like Sa Copeland Verdict and Nascator Prosperity Downfall. While some viewers responded with sympathy, many reacted with anger or vindication, citing their own stories of tithes given in desperation, of promises made in faith that never materialized. The psychological toll on Copeland's family became increasingly apparent. His daughter, Terry Pearsons, who had once been groomed to take over the ministry, vanished from public view. Friends close to the family later revealed that she was hospitalized for stress-related issues, unable to reconcile the man she called Daddy with the one now being called a criminal. Kenneth's son, John, who had been involved in the ministry's finances, was also subpoenaed and faced a separate civil suit by a group of former donors seeking damages for alleged misuse of funds. Gloria, ever the faithful partner, remained, steadfast by her husband's side, but was now largely confined to their primary residence, one of the few remaining properties not seized by the government. Inside prison, Copeland was reportedly placed in protective custody, separated from the general population due to the high-profile nature of his case. Life behind bars was a far cry from the palatial homes and first-class jetliners he once enjoyed. He no longer commanded crowds, but instead attended quiet state-run chapel services, where his presence stirred both curiosity and resentment among other inmates. Prison sources claimed that he spent long hours in solitude, often reading the Bible, sometimes talking to himself. Whether he was preparing a legal appeal, clinging to his faith, or simply trying to make sense of his downfall was anyone's guess. The broader implications of Copeland's sentencing rippled across the country. Lawmakers reignited debates about tax exemptions for religious organizations. Congressional hearings were held examining how megachurches report finances and whether stricter regulations should be put in place. Some states began introducing new legislation to require annual independent audits for ministries receiving over a certain amount in donations. The days of unchecked spiritual empires seemed numbered. Meanwhile, former donors launched class action. Lawsuits against Kenneth Copeland Ministries. One plaintiff, a widowed mother of 3, said she had donated her last savings to the ministry in hopes that God would multiply it as Copeland promised on TV. Instead, she said tearfully during a press conference, "I was left with nothing." Her words struck a nerve, capturing the heartache of thousands who had given in good faith only to feel betrayed. And yet, even in disgrace, Copeland retained a small but fierce base of supporters. Online forums and private prayer groups popped up defending him, suggesting the entire case had been orchestrated by political or anti-Christian forces. Some claimed that he had been targeted because of his influence and that his downfall was a sign that the end times were near. These groups shared old clips of Copeland's most powerful sermons and held digital vigils, praying for his release. But even among them, a sense of uncertainty lingered. The man who had once stood as a titan of televangelism, who declared that faith could move mountains and wealth was proof of God's blessing, now sat behind steel bars, stripped of his pulpit, reputation, and power. What remained was not just the ruins of a ministry, but the cautionary tale of how charisma, unchecked influence, and blind faith can blur the line between spiritual leadership and exploitation. Perhaps the most tragic part of the story is how it overshadowed the genuine good that Kenneth Copeland Ministries once did, disaster relief efforts, feeding programs, and prison ministries that had changed real lives. But now those stories are buried beneath scandal, their light dimmed by betrayal.